I never thought one winter night would burn itself into my memory forever. Christmas Eve. A night that should have been filled with laughter, warmth, and love. A night when families gathered together, when songs filled the air, when the world outside sparkled with hope. For everyone else, maybe it was. For me, it became the night everything shattered. I remember the crunch of snow beneath my boots as I trudged up the driveway of the Black family estate. The mansion looked beautiful from the outside, glowing with golden lights, a giant tree sparkling in the window. Neighbors would have thought it was a picture-perfect family home, but behind those walls, the truth was very different. My jacket clung heavy and wet to my shoulders from the storm. My fingers burned with cold as I fumbled for the key. My body ached after another 12-hour shift at the grocery store, stocking shelves and carrying boxes. But exhaustion wasn't what made my steps slow. It was dread. The moment I pushed open the oak doors, that dread became reality. Inside, the scent of roasted turkey and baked pies filled the air, mingling with the faint burn of whiskey. The fire crackled in the hearth. Carols played softly from the old stereo. By all appearances, it was a perfect holiday evening. But the first thing I saw was my father, Richard Black, a man who carried himself like a king, even when he was drowning in whiskey. He sat in his leather armchair, glass in hand, his sharp eyes already fixed on me. Not with love, not even recognition. With disdain, as if I were some stranger who didn't belong in his house. "Why are you even here?" he muttered, his voice low, the words slurred just enough to reveal the alcohol but sharp enough to cut me open. I froze in the doorway, my breath caught. For a moment I thought maybe he was joking. Maybe it was his twisted way of greeting me. But then I saw Dorian. My younger brother lounged on the couch like a prince. Perfect hair, expensive sweater, phone glowing in his hand as he scrolled through messages. He didn't even look at me at first. Just smirked, like he'd been waiting for this moment. And then there was my mother, sitting quietly at the dining table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes red and tired. She looked at me for just a second, a flicker of sorrow, of apology, and then she looked down again. I set my bag by the door, forcing a weak smile. "It's Christmas, Dad. I thought we'd at least eat together tonight." Richard's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Eat together? You think this is your house? You think you belong here?" My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, Dorian finally looked up. His smirk widened. "He means you're just a guest here, a guest who's overstayed his welcome." His words stung like fire, but the worst part was the silence that followed. My mother didn't protest. She didn't whisper my name. She didn't even look at me. It wasn't always so blatant. Or maybe I was too young to see it clearly. But looking back, the divide was always there. Dorian and I grew up under the same roof, but in different worlds. He was the golden child, the chosen one. Every birthday he was showered with gifts, bicycles, the newest gaming consoles, sneakers worth more than I made in a month. At 16, my father handed him the keys to a shiny new car. When he crashed it, drunk, reckless, careless, he was given another, just like that. And me? My birthdays passed quietly, often forgotten. If I was lucky, I got a sweater that didn't fit, or a half-hearted pat on the shoulder. By 12, I stopped waiting. I learned disappointment was the only thing I could count on. The neighbor saw it too. Mrs. Green from across the street once asked why Dorian always had the latest gadgets while I kicked around broken toys. My father laughed in her face. "Because one son deserves it," he said, "and the other doesn't." That was Richard Black, cruel and unapologetic, and he meant every word. I was 16 when the first real crack appeared. I had always loved writing, poetry, short stories, anything that let me escape the silence of my house. That summer, I was accepted into a prestigious writing program. I remember running into the living room with the letter in my hands, my heart racing. "Dad, I got in. They picked me," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be proud. That he'd smile, put down his paper, and say, "Well done, son." But he didn't even look up. "You think I'm paying for that nonsense? Dorian needs money for driving lessons." I stood frozen, the letter crumpling in my hands. "But Dad, this could—" "Enough," he snapped. My mother whispered gently, "Maybe we can afford both." But one glare from him silenced her. That night, he came to my room. He leaned in the doorway, his silhouette tall, menacing. His voice was deliberate, cold. "You'll never inherit this house," he said. "Everything I've built, everything I own, goes to Dorian. You'll get nothing. You are nothing." At 16, those words shattered something inside me. I wanted to believe he was drunk, angry, speaking out of frustration. But the steel in his eyes told me he meant every word. The years that followed blurred into a cycle of humiliation and neglect. When Dorian scraped by with a passing grade, Dad threw him a party. When I made honor roll 3 years in a row, it wasn't even mentioned. When Dorian crashed another car, Dad covered it up. When I asked for money for textbooks, I was told to get another job. So I did. I worked nights stocking shelves, weekends cleaning offices, summers doing odd jobs just to keep myself afloat. Anything to carve a place for myself outside those walls. I spent more nights away than home, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stand sitting at that dinner table, watching my father beam at Dorian while I disappeared in silence. But despite it all, I clung to hope. Hope that maybe one day he'd see me, that maybe he'd recognize I wasn't worthless. I didn't realize then that hope was just another cruel illusion. By the time I turned 20, the divide was a canyon. Dorian lived like royalty in the guest house, throwing parties, flaunting his wealth online. I was scraping by in a one-room apartment downtown, counting coins to pay rent. One night I returned to the estate to collect some books I had left behind. The house was quiet, dimly lit. I moved through the hallway, but then I heard voices in the kitchen. I stopped, listened. It was my father and Dorian. "He's weak," my father said, his voice low but sharp. "Always has been. He'll never amount to anything. The sooner we cut him off completely, the better." Dorian chuckled. "Good. That way I'll get everything. He doesn't deserve a cent anyway." Their words cut deeper than any knife. My chest tightened. My palms grew slick. They weren't just ignoring me anymore. They were planning to erase me. I wanted to burst in, to scream, to demand why. But instead I turned and walked away quietly, my heart breaking with every step. Because I knew nothing I said would change it. To them I was disposable. And then there was my mother. She saw it all, she heard it all, and yet she never stood up for me. One night I confronted her in the kitchen. My voice cracked. "Why don't you ever defend me? Why do you let them treat me like this?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she couldn't meet my gaze. "Your father won't listen," she whispered. "It's better if you stay quiet." Stay quiet, that was her answer. And for years I obeyed, but silence only gave them more power. And so, on that snowy Christmas Eve, when my father sneered at me from his chair and Dorian smirked like the heir to a throne, I finally understood the truth. This was never my home. Maybe it never had been. But what none of us knew, what nobody could have guessed, was that my grandfather, Thomas Black, had been watching. He had seen every cruelty, every betrayal, every silence. And quietly, patiently, he was already planning a reckoning that would bring the entire house of lies crashing down. The storm outside grew worse as the night wore on, but inside the Black estate, the real storm was only beginning. The fire crackled in the hearth, shadows flickering against the walls lined with family portraits. Those painted faces, my grandfather in his youth, my father and mother on their wedding day, even a toddler Dorian smiling in his golden curls, seemed to mock me. My own face was missing, always missing. I stood frozen in the entryway, my father's words replaying in my head. "You think you belong here?" The smirk on Dorian's lips lingered, as if he was daring me to fight back. My mother's silence felt heavier than the snow outside. I wanted to scream, to slam my fists on the table and demand, "Why am I treated like this? What did I ever do but try to be your son?" But the words never came. They sat heavy in my chest, choking me. Instead, I turned toward the staircase, hoping to disappear into the solitude of my old room. But before I could take a step, my father's voice lashed out again. "Don't go upstairs. That's not your room anymore." I stopped cold. Slowly, I turned back. "What do you mean?" Richard rose from his chair, his frame towering, the glass of whiskey still clutched in his hand. His face was red, his eyes burning with cruel certainty. "I mean, you're done here, Ethan. I told you years ago. You'll get nothing. This house belongs to Dorian now. You don't live here. You don't belong here. And tonight, you don't stay here." For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. The room swayed. My hands trembled at my sides. "You're throwing me out? On Christmas?" Dorian chuckled from the couch. "Merry Christmas, brother." My mother shifted uncomfortably, her hands clutching the edge of the table. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but then she looked at my father, and her mouth closed again. Silence, as always. I stared at her, silently begging, "Say something, please, just once, stand up for me." But she dropped her gaze. That silence was louder than any scream. I grabbed my bag, my throat tight. "Fine, if that's what you want." Richard sneered. "It's not what I want. It's what you deserve." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Without another word, I turned and stepped back out into the storm. The door slammed behind me, and the sound echoed in my chest like the closing of a tomb. The cold air cut into me immediately, biting at my skin, filling my lungs with ice. I stood in the driveway, staring at the glowing windows of the estate. From the outside, it looked warm, perfect, welcoming. But I knew better. It was a fortress built on lies, greed, and cruelty. I trudged down the road, snow soaking through my shoes, wind stinging my face. I had nowhere to go. My tiny apartment lease had ended weeks ago when I couldn't keep up with rent. I'd been sleeping in my old room at the estate, clinging to the little space I thought I still had, but now even that was gone. I ended up on a friend's couch that night, but even there I felt like a burden. My bag with a few clothes and notebooks was all I had. The next weeks blurred into survival. I picked up extra shifts at the grocery store, stocking shelves until dawn, sweeping floors until my back ached. On weekends, I scrubbed office toilets, delivered food, shoveled snow for neighbors who barely remembered my name. Every dollar went to saving for a new place. But no matter how hard I worked, it never felt like enough. What hurt more than the exhaustion was the loneliness. I'd scroll through my phone late at night, looking at photos of families celebrating together, smiles, laughter, togetherness. Meanwhile, my father and Dorian flaunted their lives online, lavish dinners, expensive vacations, parties at the estate, and my mother? She appeared in the background of those photos, always standing close to them, never looking at the camera. Not once did she call me. Not once did she check if I was alive. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying my father's words, "You are nothing." I'd whisper to myself, maybe he's right. Maybe I am nothing. But another voice, quiet, buried deep, kept whispering back, "No, you're more than this. You have to be." I remembered being 10 years old, standing on the sidelines of Dorian's soccer game. He missed the goal and Dad clapped, shouting, "Good try, son. You'll get it next time." But when I brought home a trophy for a writing contest, Dad barely glanced at it. "Waste of time," he muttered, tossing the certificate aside. I remembered birthdays where Dorian's gifts filled the entire living room, wrapped boxes stacked high, bows glittering. On my birthday, I once got a used book with a torn cover. And I remembered the night he told me, in that cold voice, that I would inherit nothing, that I was nothing. Those memories haunted me. They played over and over, feeding the bitterness growing inside. One evening, after a 14-hour shift, I walked past the estate. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some masochistic need to torture myself. The windows glowed warmly, laughter spilling faintly into the night. I saw Dorian's car parked out front, a shiny new model, my father's pride. I stood in the snow for nearly an hour, staring at the house that had once been mine. My fingers clenched into fists. My chest ached with anger, sorrow, longing. That night, as I trudged back to the tiny room I was renting by then, I swore to myself, one day things will change. One day they'll regret what they did to me. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But deep down I felt it. The storm wasn't over. And then came the letter. Weeks later I received a message from my grandfather, Thomas Black. He wanted to see me. Alone. My grandfather had always been distant, quiet, a man who watched more than he spoke. I never knew where I stood with him, but the fact that he reached out to me now, after everything, lit a spark of hope. Maybe he knew. Maybe he'd seen. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my bag. For the first time in years, I felt something other than anger or despair. I felt possibility. As the weeks of struggle stretched on, I clung to that meeting with my grandfather. Meanwhile, my father and Dorian thrived. Or so they thought. They basked in wealth, power, and arrogance, blind to the storm gathering on the horizon. They had no idea that the very man they dismissed as nothing was about to become the center of everything. And when the truth came out, when my grandfather revealed what he had seen, what he had decided, Christmas would never be the same again. The night my grandfather called us together, the Black estate seemed strangely alive. The chandeliers glowed brighter than usual, the fireplace roared, the long dining table was set with silverware polished to a mirror shine. But beneath the glittering perfection, tension hummed in the air like an invisible current. I sat near the end of the table, my heart thudding. I hadn't been invited to one of these family dinners in years. The fact that I was here tonight made my stomach churn with suspicion. Dorian was already sprawled in his chair, one arm slung over the back, scrolling through his phone like the gathering bored him. My father sat tall, his suit pressed, his watch gleaming, though the deep lines on his face revealed the wear of his endless drinking. My mother, as always, sat in silence, her hands folded neatly, her eyes darting between us as though bracing for a storm. At the head of the table sat my grandfather, Thomas Black. He looked older than I remembered, frailer, his hands trembling slightly as he held his cane. But when his eyes met mine, there was fire there, sharp, alive, unbroken. He tapped his fork against his glass. The sound cut through the room, pulling everyone's attention. "Tonight," he began, his voice steady, "we celebrate family, or at least what family should be." My father chuckled, lifting his glass. "Indeed, family is everything. My grandfather's gaze sharpened. Is it? Because I have seen what this family has become, and it disgusts me. The words landed like stones. My father shifted, his smile faltering. Dorian finally looked up from his phone. I have watched, my grandfather continued, his voice rising with each word. I have watched as one son squandered every gift handed to him. I have watched as another son, he glared at my father, poisoned this house with greed and cruelty. I have watched a mother stay silent while her child was humiliated, and I have watched a grandson endure. My chest tightened. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I kept mine locked on the tablecloth, afraid to breathe. I am not blind, my grandfather said, his voice trembling now with anger. Do you think I didn't see? Do you think I didn't hear? I know everything. Every word, every betrayal, every cruel laugh. He rose slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. The room seemed to shrink around him as he declared, That is why I have changed my will. The silence was deafening. Then he said it. Everything I own, every house, every business, every cent will go to Ethan. The words rang in my ears, surreal, impossible. My heart stopped. Dorian's chair screeched back as he jumped to his feet. What? That's insane. You can't just... He doesn't deserve... Sit down, my grandfather thundered, slamming his cane against the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Dorian flinched but kept shouting, I'm your blood! I'm the one who's been here! He's nothing! Nothing! My father slammed his glass onto the table, his face red, his voice shaking with fury. Father, this is madness. He's ungrateful, lazy. He's not fit to inherit the black legacy. And you are? My grandfather barked. You who abandoned your own child? Who mocked him, cast him out, and called him worthless? Tell me, Richard, what kind of legacy is that? My father's mouth opened, but no words came. I have watched, my grandfather continued, his voice rising with each word. I have watched as one son squandered every gift handed to him. I have watched as another son, he glared at my father, poisoned this house with greed and cruelty. I have watched a mother stay silent while her child was humiliated, and I have watched a grandson endure. My chest tightened. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I kept mine locked on the tablecloth, afraid to breathe. I am not blind, my grandfather said, his voice trembling now with anger. Do you think I didn't see? Do you think I didn't hear? I know everything. Every word, every betrayal, every cruel laugh. He rose slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. The room seemed to shrink around him as he declared, That is why I have changed my will. The silence was deafening. Then he said it. Everything I own, every house, every business, every cent will go to Ethan. The words rang in my ears, surreal, impossible. My heart stopped. Dorian's chair screeched back as he jumped to his feet. What? That's insane. You can't just... He doesn't deserve... Sit down, my grandfather thundered, slamming his cane against the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Dorian flinched but kept shouting, I'm your blood! I'm the one who's been here! He's nothing! Nothing! My father slammed his glass onto the table, his face red, his voice shaking with fury. Father, this is madness. He's ungrateful, lazy. He's not fit to inherit the black legacy. And you are? My grandfather barked. You who abandoned your own child? Who mocked him, cast him out, and called him worthless? Tell me, Richard, what kind of legacy is that? My father's mouth opened, but no words came. The weeks that followed were chaos. News spread quickly. Business partners, lawyers, even neighbors knew that the black fortune was no longer in Richard's control. Investors pulled out, creditors demanded payment, and the empire my father had so proudly flaunted crumbled overnight. I watched from a distance as his world collapsed. The cars disappeared from the driveway one by one. The parties stopped. The estate grew quiet, empty, cold. Dorian, once the golden boy surrounded by friends, found himself abandoned. His so-called companions moved on the moment the money dried up. He tried to keep up appearances, borrowing, lying, pretending, but the truth always leaks out. Soon, he was a laughingstock. I heard stories of him being thrown out of bars, humiliated at parties, mocked by the very people who once worshipped him. His social media accounts went silent. It wasn't long before the knocking began. Late one night, rain hammered against my apartment window. A knock echoed through the hall. I opened the door to find Dorian, drenched, shivering, his eyes wild with desperation. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, I need help. I have nothing, no money, no friends. I'm begging you." I stared at him, memories crashing through me. His smirk, his cruel laughter, the way he watched as my father threw me out. "You had everything," I said quietly, "and you wasted it. You mocked me. You left me to suffer, and now you expect me to save you. No, Dorian. You made your choice. Live with it." His shoulders sagged. For the first time in my life, I saw shame in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and walked into the night. Days later, my father came to. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale, his once commanding presence reduced to a trembling shadow. "Son," he said, forcing the word out like it burned. I made mistakes. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. But I'm still your father. You can't just let me lose everything." I looked at him for a long time. This man who told me I was nothing, who stripped me of my dignity, who abandoned me. "You chose Dorian over me," I said. "You chose greed over love. Don't call me your son now." His lips trembled, but no words came. I closed the door. Their downfall wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning. Because as much as they had lost, as much as they begged and wept, karma hadn't finished with them. And when the final blow came, it would not only strip them of wealth and pride, it would expose every secret they had ever tried to bury. I didn't know then just how far the reckoning would go, but I could feel it, deep in my bones. The Black family was about to face a storm unlike any they had ever known. The weeks after my grandfather's revelation were like watching a great empire sink beneath the waves. The Black name, once gilded and untouchable, was now whispered with scorn. My father tried to fight it at first. He strutted through town in his wrinkled suits, still barking orders at men who no longer answered. He stormed into boardrooms as if his authority still mattered, only to be met with cold stares and folded arms. Creditors circled him like vultures. Old partners turned their backs. The empire he worshipped crumbled in his hands. Dorian fell even faster. His social circle, once packed with laughter, champagne, and fake affection, vanished the second the money dried up. The friends who drank from his bottle now mocked him behind his back. His expensive car was repossessed. His nights ended not in clubs, but in alleyways, where the bouncers tossed him without ceremony. The golden boy had turned into a cautionary tale. And yet I didn't feel triumph, just emptiness. In me, I watched from a distance. One evening I drove past the estate that had once been my prison. The lights that once blazed from every window were dim now. The grand lawn, once trimmed to perfection, was overgrown. Paint peeled from the walls. The house looked haunted, a monument to arrogance and decay. Neighbors whispered that my father was selling everything, paintings, antiques, jewelry, just to keep the lights on. But no matter how much he sold, it was never enough. I stopped the car and sat there for a long while. staring at the place that had shaped me. The memories clawed at me. The nights of silence, the humiliations, the day he threw me out into the snow. It was late one night when the knock came. When I opened the door, my father stood there. Not the king of the estate, not the powerful Richard Black. Just a man, broken and hollow. His suit was wrinkled, his tie gone. His face sagged, his eyes bloodshot. Behind him, Dorian lingered, his once proud shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Ethan," my father rasped, "please, we have nowhere else to go. The creditors, they're taking everything. We just need a place to stay, just for a while." Dorian's voice cracked. "Come on, man, we're family. You can't just let us rot." I stared at them. The same men who had laughed at my pain, who had called me worthless, who had thrown me into the cold. And now they stood at my door begging. I took a slow breath. My voice was steady. Family isn't blood. Family is loyalty. Family is love. You taught me that by showing me what it isn't. My father's lips trembled. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of being truly alone. "You did this to yourself," I said. Then I closed the door. The echo of that door slamming was the sound of chains breaking. Weeks later, I sat at my grandfather's bedside. His body was weak, but his eyes still held fire. "Ethan," he whispered, gripping my hand, "you've seen what greed does, what betrayal does, but don't let it poison you. Don't become what they were." Tears burned my eyes. "I won't, Grandpa, I promise." He smiled faintly. "Good. Then the black legacy will live through you, not them. Through kindness, not cruelty." Those were his last words to me. Days later, he passed quietly in his sleep. At the funeral, the church was nearly empty. No crowds, no admirers, no partners. Just a handful of people who truly respected him. My father and Dorian stood at the back, their faces pale, their presence unwelcome. They looked at me as if searching for a lifeline, but I gave them nothing. When the coffin was lowered into the earth, I felt the weight of two things: grief for the only man who had ever truly seen me, and freedom. With the inheritance, I didn't chase revenge, I rebuilt. I moved into a modest home, not a mansion. I finished the education my father once denied me. I invested, not in vanity but in people. Scholarships for kids like me. Small businesses struggling to survive. Community centers where the forgotten could feel seen. Slowly I carved a new black legacy, one not of greed but of hope. Sometimes I still drive past the estate. It stands empty now, sold off to strangers. The lawn is wild, the windows dark. It is nothing but a hollow shell, just like the men who once ruled it. My father lives in a cramped apartment, surviving off scraps of a pride that died long ago. Dorian drifts from job to job, his arrogance replaced by bitterness. They rarely speak to each other anymore. In the end, their greed destroyed not just their fortune, but their bond. And me, I carry my grandfather's words. Karma came for them, not with swords or fire, but with silence, with emptiness, with truth. They mocked me once, called me nothing. Now they are the ones forgotten. And as I stand in the snow watching the wind whip across the abandoned estate, I realize something. The greatest revenge is not their downfall. It is my survival, my rise, my peace.